Today on The State of Us, America's parking problem. The South has the strongest jobs and red states and clean energy succeed. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at the parking problem that America has, and it might not be what you think. It's that we have too much parking. That's right. You heard that cities are getting rid of spaces to free up land for new development and for people looking for a place to live, which kind of runs counter to, I think, what we're facing in our small little town. But when we actually get into it, you'll see what's going on. We're also going to look at how the South has the strongest job growth from 2022, what that tells us about where things are at, and then also how red states are benefiting the most from clean energy subsidies. So we've got a lot to get into. You excited, Lance?
No, yes, I am interested because what the heck? There are enough parking places in the big city. When I go to the big city, it's like that's the number one issue is where am I going to park and how far away am I going to have to park from where I want to go? Is it that we really have too many, or is it the fact that we need the land for other things?
So estimates conclude that there are between 700 million and 2 billion parking spaces in the United States. That equates to between 2.5 on the low end and 7 spots on the high end for every registered vehicle on the road. So the notion that we don't have enough parking spots, right, on the whole is obviously not true because we've got more than enough for every vehicle, at least twice over. And in some cases, if we go with the high end, 7 times over. The question comes down to, I think, 2 big things.
Where are they located?
Where are they, right?
Okay.
That's a big one.
I got one right. What's the other one?
Where are they? And what are our expectations for parking spots? Because that's a big thing that the article covers. I mean, why is this important? Why do you care? If you live in a, rural area, well, I don't have a parking problem. Well, even in our small town here in Urbana, where we're sitting, downtown Urbana, this is an item that's been talked about. People say there's a parking problem. And I always tell people there is a parking problem, but it's not that there's not enough parking. It's that our job in communicating where the parking is, how to get to the parking, those are lacking. And yes, as development continues, there might be a problem with if you increase the number of residents, are you also increasing the number of cars, which is another question.
Well, and I think too, in a small town like this, if somebody has to walk a block or two, they think there's a problem. I mean, I'm used to, pulling in front of the store or the business that I'm going to go into, pulling right in front.
Right.
And oh my God, both spots in front of the store are taken and I've got to go around the corner and walk half a block. There's a parking problem in this town.
Right.
But when you go to the big city, if you get within 2 or 3 blocks of where it is,
you did pretty good.
You were lucky that day to find a good parking. So part of it is that perspective, right? Of what you're used to. I think as well. I'm like, I'm mad when I came down today to do the show. Mm-hmm. I had to get the 3rd spot from the door.
Oh, well.
What were 2 people doing?
You poor man.
Yeah. Well, it was raining outside.
Oh.
What were people doing 2 spots, in front of where I wanted to park?
The other thing they point out is this idea that for a lot of people, we search for the free on-street, right, or publicly provided parking.
What, you pay for parking?
And we circle around and around rather than pay for the parking. So,
right.
Again, I think it's this expectations versus reality item. And also the fact that our zoning codes, for the most part, and like in our small town, this is required, in most residential districts, or if you're building residential units, you're required to put in a certain number of spaces per unit. In our medium density residential district, we're required 2 parking spaces per unit that you put in.
Wow.
So it doesn't matter if that unit's for 1 person or for 5 people, you're putting in 2 parking spaces for the unit no matter what, if you're going to be in compliance with code. Now, that may not sound so bad, but here's what really stood out to me in the article, Lance. A garage adds about 17% to the average rent, according to a recent study. Almost 3/4 of carless renters have a parking spot included in their rent. They collectively pay $440 million a year for parking that they do not use. About 20 years ago, researchers and local leaders began challenging the rationale behind a lot of those rules. A 2016 study by a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, found many of those spots are rarely used. The cost of providing all those spots is passed on to consumers in the form of higher rents or retail prices that even non-drivers end up having to pay to subsidize the drivers.
Sure.
Parking actually covers about 14% of the land area in Los Angeles County, according to a recent study by a group of researchers from Arizona State University. And that is an area almost as large as Houston. So we take up a lot of area for parking. The question is, do we need all that parking?
But I remember when I was first retired and I was looking to get a condo in St. Louis across from the ballpark. And one of the selling points for the condos were the ones that listed an available parking space, because I would have not been living there full time. I would have been driving in from Ohio on, for weeks or days at a time. And that parking spot was a real perk for me. But then to your point, those months that I would have been paying rent on that condo, but not using the parking spaces, I would have been paying for a parking space that I wasn't using. Is that kind of what, what you're saying? And along with then, I'm sure if you live in a major like a New York City or a Chicago, you get charged for a parking spot, even if you don't use a car, because you have public transportation. In our small Midwestern town, public transportation, that's your neighbor who picks you up and takes you where you want to go. So, but it is true in the major metropolitan areas, not on the West Coast, that many people live their whole life without ever getting a driver's license, because there's no necessity to have a car, because you can get anywhere you want to go in New York City or Philadelphia or Chicago by using public transportation. So why buy a car and have the cost of a car plus insurance plus your point of how much you're paying for a parking spot? Cheaper to go to your local Hertz Rent-A-Car or wherever and rent a car for the weekend to drive out of town than it is to pay all those subsidiary fees for a parking space you never use.
And Americans are driving less. Even after the pandemic.
Who is?
Americans
Who's driving
drove
less?
4% fewer miles in 2022 than
Man,
they
I'm
did in
holding up my
2019.
end. I'm holding up my end. There's a lot of people not be driving much at all because I'm putting the miles on.
Well, and lo and behold, a lot of these things, a lot of these urban development policies came to play after the 50s and 60s, the housing boom, this notion that cars were becoming the norm in the American life. I think part of what we're seeing too, though, is a trend away from that, to your point of there's more people that live in areas where having a car isn't necessary. And as public transportation improves, a thing that we've talked a lot about on this show, even to rural areas, some of the need to have a vehicle may become less. And I think that's something that you have to look at, is also who is your housing targeted to, rather than it being a blanket thing of assuming that every residential unit automatically needs, parking with it, or that it needs 2 or 3 spaces as opposed to needing 1 space or half a space per unit. The other thing that, you've seen come about is this idea that residents, maybe you're not providing a parking space for every unit. You're providing, say that you're building a 30-unit development. Well, I'm only going to put in 20 parking spaces. Well, that's not enough.
Right.
Well, there's an assumption, though, that all 30 people are going to have at least 1 car. And if you live in an area, for example, where you can support that, no, or For example, you're just going to, when you're renting to people, why not make one of the requirements that, you can't rent more units than you have spaces for if you're including those in rent, So in other words, if I'm going to rent to one of these 10 units that doesn't have a space, that has to be something that the person, who's renting says, well, I don't have a car. So, again, but for those people who don't have cars, why would you want to pay $250 more a month to have a parking space that you don't need?
Exactly.
I mean, that doesn't seem fair either, right? It's like, well, but the rent for this apartment's more money. Well, why? Well, because they built a parking garage. Well, do you have a car? Well, no. Okay, well, do you have to pay for that parking? Well, it's built into my rent. Oh, okay. Well, so rents are higher for parking spaces that aren't being used. And in some places that can be upwards of 40% of residents not having a car.
Well, that's where I sublet my parking spot.
But end up paying for the spot,
I find a friend who needs a parking spot and say, hey, you can use mine in my building and I'll register your car for my parking spot.
Yeah. I think it's a change in just are cars going to stay part of the ubiquitous American life, or are they going to go by the wayside?
I don't know, because I've got 3 cars for 2 drivers, and in the last 2 years, I've put new tires on all 3 of them.
Right.
So
well, you're from the generation of the love of the automobile.
You better believe it.
And we've already talked about how, recent generations, that desire for spending as much on a vehicle has also changed as well.
Well, that's fine. If they don't want a car, don't ask me for a ride. It's like my truck, right? Everybody gonna look down their nose at me for driving my big old truck. Yeah,
when they want something hauled,
when they want something hauled or something moved, call to go with the truck, right?
Well, it's also that notion of the improvement of access to being able to rent things, like, U-Haul's done a lot, and other companies in recent years, where it is like, do you need to own a truck, or do you just need to be able to rent a truck? Well, if you only need a truck, 2 or 3 times a year, it probably doesn't make economical sense to own it. But if I can rent it and it costs me $50 for the day, like, well, great. I rented it. I got my stuff done. I took it back. I don't need to own it all the time.
Or you can rent a friend.
Right. Or you can rent a friend.
Who has a truck.
Yeah. Or who has a vehicle. I mean, carpooling obviously has increased, a good bit as well. So just lots of things like that are going to have an impact on urban development. And I think it's going back to that government has to be agreeable and willing to listen to what their community needs and not just assume, assuming, for example, that an efficiency apartment that's designed for one person needs 3 parking spaces with it is probably a bad assumption, and it leads to higher development costs and putting in parking spaces that you don't need. Likewise, if you have congestion and a lot of people who can't find places to park and they're wanting to shop somewhere, then maybe you need to think about improving signage to existing parking, making it easier to find the parking, and maybe developing multi-level parking in a garage rather than trying to continue to add surface level lots, which take up valuable land space that could be developed into housing. Even though some people like the friendly redneck liberal may not be so friendly about your parking garage.
But if that's where I have to park, I'll park there, especially if you tell me you're going to build some nice apartments for people, because we know we've done many shows here about the housing shortage, and we need to take care of that as well. So,
well, and your daughters are feeling that, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they live in an area where rents are
extremely high.
You could have a house here for less than what you're paying in rent for something that's way smaller.
But housing prices are so high that you really can't.
Yeah. Well, if you could ever save enough money for the down payment, which you can't do because you have to spend so much money on your rent that you can't save enough to buy a house.
Yep.
Yeah, we've had that
for real.
different show. But let's talk about how the South has become the hotbed of job growth. Oh my gosh. And Lance, for those that don't know, was born there. So he's going to lead us through that. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
So the South was home to the strongest job markets in 2022. Justin, what city topped the list? I don't think you looked at this, did you?
No, I didn't. Well, I mean, I looked at it, but not really.
Yeah. So what do
you
you
had
think?
handed it to me, so I knew it wasn't important.
So I understand. But it had, 3 graphs on it.
It did. Well, that's what I looked at.
That's what I knew you would, Well, it is listed on one of the 3 graphs.
Oh.
So what was the
Well, I
number
saw there was a
one-
list over to the side.
The number 1 city. Did you see it? What was it?
No, I don't know.
We'll take a wild guess. What would you say was the biggest, strongest job market in 2022? Come on, I only
Just
gave
to
you
make you happy, I'm going to say St. Louis.
St. Louis isn't a southern city. It's a Midwestern city.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. According to who? The people in St. Louis or everybody else?
According to me.
Oh, okay.
I'm the only person that matters. At least in this show.
I'm going to see what Google says. While
Number
you're looking
1.
at that.
Number 1 was Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville. Can you believe that? Nashville, Tennessee. Followed by Austin, Texas. And then Jacksonville, Florida was 3, with Orlando, Florida being 7 and Miami being 10. So Florida had 3 of the strongest job markets in their state. And then Austin was joined by Dallas. So Texas had 2 of the top 5. And then North Carolina had Raleigh at number 5 and Charlotte as number 8. The only non-northern city in the top 10 was Salt Lake City out in Utah. What did you find about St.
Salt Lake
Louis?
City. It's a contentious item.
Oh, okay.
So
That's why we were arguing.
yes, that is why we were arguing.
So you might wonder, well, how in the world did the Wall Street Journal figure out where the strongest job markets were? Well, it was based on 5 factors. 1, the unemployment rate. 2, the labor force participation rate. 3, changes to employment levels, the size of the labor force, and wages in 2022. Larger areas with more than 1 million residents were ranked separately from smaller ones. So that's how we got it, okay? But 9 out of the top 10 were southern cities. Now, you might say, okay, so we know how they figured it out, but what are the other reasons that these are growing? Well, most of these southern regions, according to the article, quote, are lower cost areas, and they are growing rapidly. So there's an increasingly large critical mass of young, educated people, Adam Kamens, an economist at Moody's Analytics, said. The affordability is really appealing to families as well.
Well, it makes sense with the pandemic, right? I mean, not just the pandemic, but what we were seeing with housing before. And then part of what the pandemic accelerated is people looking at alternative options, looking for cheaper housing, maybe looking for a place where they could afford a home instead of just, an apartment. And if you're able to do remote work, right, then some of these places may be of interest because maybe you could still get the amenities of what some larger cities have, but do it at a more affordable price.
But like you said, if you're a family or a young person just starting out, okay, where are the cheaper places to live? Okay, well, that's where I want to go. Well, if many of you go there, then what happens to the pool of workers to choose from? Well, it becomes better. So now where do companies look to expand? And if companies are going to expand in that region because there's a better workforce, then what's the effect on that? Well, it's going to bring in even more young workers and young families into the area. To your point, yes, it's cheaper for them to live there, but there are also good jobs. Example, to attract and retain workers, employers across Jacksonville are ramping up wages. The city's weekly wages grew at the 4th fastest rate of any large metro area last year. Its South Florida cousin, Miami, logged the nation's largest wage gains. Oh, so you mean if you want to find people, you need to offer them a cheap place to live and good wages?
What an idea.
So why aren't more places doing this? Would be, why is it the South? The article doesn't answer that, so I'm kind of asking you that. Why do you think because there's just smarter people in the South?
Well, I'm not sure. Right.
That would be my answer.
What it is.
Well, you Northerners have always, in my lifetime, looked down your noses at, well, you guys talk funny, So you must not be very smart.
Well, I mean, according to what you said, Missouri not part of the South. So
well, no, I said St. Louis. I said I'm not
the state.
I grew up 3 hours south of St. Louis.
I
okay,
see.
I did not say you did not say Missouri.
Okay. St.
Louis.
St. Louis. Okay. So, well, and that's part of what I mean, for those who most people are like, probably don't care because they're not from Missouri or anywhere near it because, who is, but other than our friendly redneck liberal.
Boy, there went half our listeners.
I know. Sorry, all you, what do you call people from Missouri?
Missourians.
Okay. Hey, Missourians. I got it. See?
Yeah. Well, typically we're called hillbillies.
Well, yeah. Nah.
Back before
I was trying to be nice.
Before the woke era.
Oh, okay.
See, I wear it as a badge of pride.
Redneck?
Yeah.
Well, hey, we did that episode, though, remember? Right. The difference between hillbillies and rednecks, right. And we did some history there.
And Charlie Daniels Band.
Yes.
Country Boy Will Survive.
The answer to the question is complex in that it depends on who you ask.
Even if you take my parking spot away from me, I will still survive.
And the reason is because the state of Missouri is technically part of the Midwest. I mean, according to, like the Census Bureau.
That's what I told you off air.
However, you'll find a lot of Western influence, lo and behold, in the western part of the state. And you will find a good bit of Southern influence in the southern part of the state. So the state is not inherently Southern or Western. It is a Midwestern state. But depending on who you talk to in the state, like, for example, the friendly redneck liberal, they may or may not claim to be part of the South.
But you said St. Louis, and then St. Louis is not a Southern city.
That is what I said. What's the flag of Missouri look like?
Well, if you're talking western part, you're talking about Kansas City. That's the western part of the state. And see, the northern part of the state is very flat and farmland. The southern part of the state is very hilly.
We're learning all kinds of things. So to answer your question about why southern
part
states,
of the Ozark Mountain Range,
or the South, I guess we should say, why are they seeing, this? I'm not sure that it's some by grand design. I think it's more of we've known. I mean, there's been the South has had economic troubles for a long time, for different reasons. So I think you've seen some of these metropolitan areas that have this repressed economy, but still have some of that infrastructure of larger areas. And so you have this opportunity to capitalize on that, which I'm not sure they're necessarily pushing. Maybe they are, but it's also that people are just figuring out, hey, I'm looking for a place to live that has these amenities. Where can I afford? Oh, well, I can afford here, here, and here. Those places happen to be in the South because the real estate market's different there.
Right. Well, and for instance, Jacksonville, Florida, which is in the northern section of Florida, rose from number 6 last year to number 3 this year. And it's because the region is positioned as a logistics hub in northern Florida and has been a magnet for remote workers and new companies during the pandemic. There has been explosive growth. We're still seeing warehouses being built. We're still seeing companies move in. So when you think of supply chain issues and you get a city like Jacksonville who can go up the East Coast, can go down through Florida, and can also head west through, the Panhandle and Alabama and Mississippi all the way to New Orleans, you're talking about, okay, put stuff there and you can then very easily, much more easily, send products to your different markets that you serve. It's not unlike here in central Ohio. We live very close to one of the major trucking regions because we have Interstate 70 that runs across the country east and west, and Interstate 77 that runs from Michigan down into Florida when it connects with 71. And so you can basically get on 70 or 71 or 77 and get anywhere you want. And those two, they meet in Columbus and Dayton, which are about an hour apart. So when we get out on the road, we see all kinds of semis, and they're not coming to Ohio. They're passing through Ohio, getting somewhere else, delivering goods. So we have many, many warehouses in a 60-mile radius of where we live because of our road system. So that's probably what's going on down in Jacksonville.
So is there any valuable lessons to be taken from this? I mean, other than
Well, I think,
provide affordable places with the right amenities for people to live, and lo and behold, they'll want to live there.
right. And once you get those workers, once you attract them, then you retain them. You have to work to retain them. You have to offer them livable wages
Right.
for whatever the cost of living is there, because like it says, the unemployment rate needs to be low and people need to be looking for work. And then wages have to meet demand.
Right.
So that's what you have to offer up. And I know we've done shows where smaller towns are offering remote workers, very cheap land or housing at a discount because, hey, if you come here, you're going to pay taxes in our state. You're going to buy groceries here. You're going to visit the local restaurants and all those kinds of things. So come live here. You're going to work on your computer. We don't care where you're from, but we're going to make it attractive for you to move here because then the money you're earning, you're going to spend here. And I think that's the key takeaway, right? Whether you're bringing in place workers or remote workers, you need to offer them a cheaper place to live, especially at a time when, as you've mentioned earlier in the show, how expensive housing is now. For young people, for millennials who are looking to settle somewhere, who have the ability to move around, I would think that that's one thing that they're looking at very strongly is, I know that at this point in my life, I live where housing is very cheap. So for me to move somewhere, it's very difficult because I can't get as much as I have because I can't sell mine for what it's going to cost me to move to a major metropolitan area. So I too understand that pinch of, okay, this might be a nice place to live, but can I afford to live there? And are living amenities equal to the pay I'm going to receive?
So let's talk a little bit more about red states and how they're benefiting the most from clean energy subsidies. That might seem kind of counterintuitive.
Which also typically tend to be Midwest and Southern states, right?
Interestingly enough. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
I like this one. This one, is so ironic. It's just like, I can't wait.
It makes you happy for the conundrum.
It makes me grin. Yes,
Okay.
It does.
Well, according to the Wall Street Journal, Republican-leaning states are attracting most, you heard that right, most of the clean energy investments spurred by the Biden administration's signature Inflation Reduction Act, a bill that passed Congress without any Republican votes.
So the Republicans are railing against the IRA.
We hate it.
Every editorial, every opinion that I'm reading, yet the voters in those states and the state and local officials are doing what?
Well, they're embracing it.
They're opening their arms to it. They're like, come on in and do it in our state.
Yep.
So we'll take your jobs, we'll take your factories, even though no Republican House member voted for it.
Yeah. Local lawmakers and communities in those districts are welcoming an inflow of green projects, company executives and industry experts say. Seen as business-friendly, industry experts, those include lower costs for everything from labor and electricity to taxes, as well as looser controls on permitting and the use of land. This includes units for chip manufacturing, which earlier this month announced it would spend $2.5 billion to expand a Georgia-based solar panel factory and build a new set of factories to produce components as well. Q-Cell's factory is in a district held by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican who has been skeptical about the dangers of climate change and tweeted that the Inflation Reduction Act forces Americans on the energy disaster Green New Deal. Wind and solar power development has been strong in red-leaning Sunbelt states because many of them get larger amounts of sun and wind and have more land available than the more densely populated blue-leaning areas such as the Northeast, industry experts say. The availability of skilled labor was the top reason that battery maker Fryer decided to put its factory in Georgia. And for those following anything that's happening in Ohio, Intel has decided that it will put a new chip manufacturer here. And also, General Motors has decided that it will locate a battery plant here in partnership with LG Chem for electric vehicles.
So many of these areas are controlled by Republican governors and Republican legislators. Ohio, Georgia.
Yep.
And even though the federal districts are voting against it, the governors, and like in Ohio with Intel, we changed our laws. The House of Representatives and Senate, controlled by the Republicans, changed the laws to get Intel here so that so they could be competitive in their bid, right? So they changed laws to get them here, but the House of Representatives, which has more members of Republicans than they do than Democrats here in the state of Ohio, are voting no against it, while the state and local officials are changing laws to bring them in. Green she is a piece of work, okay? And well, there's no such thing as climate change, and they're just, faking us out here. It's not even real. But not only my state, but the region I represent is offering these people to come in and build and take the jobs. But I, as the federal leader of this region, think it's all a bunch of hogwash.
That's right. Darn right.
Amazing. Now, where I'm going with this is, what are the voters doing?
Well, and
where's that disconnect that you don't understand, that you're haranguing your state and local leaders for bringing in jobs and factories and helping the local economy, but you're electing people to Congress to represent you who aren't doing a hill of beans to help you out locally. That's the disconnect that drives me crazy. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what you want. That's your opinion. But would you at least elect people that are going to do what it is you want done? That makes no sense to me, okay, at the federal level. Why you would have the wool pulled over your eyes or vote for people who are not going to support what your region needs. Because obviously you elected the state and local officials who are doing what you want, but then you go off the grid and elect federal officials to represent you who aren't doing what you want. Why do they do that? I know that's not the show. But
No.
That's what just drives me crazy. It's the same thing here in Ohio. The same thing happens here in Ohio.
Well, I'll just tell you, a city that's a little bit to the north of us, that's similar size, a little bit bigger. There's somebody there who's running for city council this year. Far-right Republican, worked inside of the Trump administration at higher levels and is working, now to get elected to city council locally. And I read this announcement post, and part of what stuck out to me was this. This is a direct quote. With Honda's new EV hub and historic reinvestment in our area, our community has the opportunity to pave the way for how communities incorporate electric vehicle infrastructure. This is from somebody,
a far-right Trumpster,
right? Who literally
talking about using EVs,
yes,
and how we're going to create a whole living environment for EVs.
That's right, and that in a small rural community, we want to lead the innovative push for EVs. Which, is great. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I totally believe in that. But
I'm glad that that's happening. But what a total 180 from just a few years ago, where somebody like this was when they were working inside of the federal administration. But that, I think, is the disconnect. And we've always said this, right? Politics being local, is that when it comes to brass tacks, if it's going to bring jobs and it's going to stimulate the economy, small towns need that. Rural communities need that.
But isn't that what you send people to Washington to do? Is to
it might be what you send them to do, but I'm not sure it's what they think they're there to do.
Well, if they're not, why are you reelecting them? Because we know that
I agree
that the reelection rate for members of the House is like over 90%.
Yeah,
or historically has been
horrendous
because it's name recognition.
Yep.
So why are you just continuing to reelect people who are not representing your district, who are telling you, well, I'm doing everything I can, but those daggone people on the other side of the aisle, whoever they are, Republicans or Democrats, they're not letting me do anything for you. All right, you go ahead but somehow your local people and your state elected officials can work with the companies and get them there. Does anybody else see the point I'm trying to make? I mean, just stop and think when you go to the polls the next time. Is that person that you've always supported? And I'm not haranguing on Republicans or Democrats, both. I'm saying as voters, won't you look a little deeper and see what have they actually done? Okay. And if they haven't done things for your district that they represent to help the economy, and that's your number one issue, why would you send them back to Washington?
I don't know.
Just a thought, right?
I don't have that answer.
Would all you people who listen to this show, please find out, if you don't know, who are your federal representatives, and then look up their history. Don't listen to what they're telling you. They're going to tell you what they think you want to hear so that they can win re-election.
They're going to tell you things that upset you so that you're motivated to vote for them to
exactly.
protect you.
They're going to tell you how they're going to protect you from the other side. I don't need to be protected. I'm perfectly capable of protecting myself. What I want them to do is improve the economy where I live, because if they do that, we all benefit. Okay. Everybody who's working makes more wages. All the owners in the area make more money. Housing goes up, more money for schools. Education gets better. I don't want to hear how they're going to protect me from the evil dark side. I want to hear, what have you done to bring the economy? And if you haven't done anything to make the economy better, and all you've done is badmouth the other side, I want somebody else.
Time for a change.
I want somebody else. I don't care who the political party is. I want somebody who's going to help my region of the country grow economically. Don't waste my time badmouthing the other side.
So
okay?
why we have the show today, Lance?
So I could say that.
Okay. Well, that's fair. That I think that's part of the reason.
Well, the main reason is because we work for True Chat.
The main reason.
And True Chat has a mission to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
We got to get our poster up in the new studio.
And we've had that, today. And, we've laid it out there for you. And it's like,
I think so. We've tried.
And it's that common theme we've been talking about forever. And that is, elect people who are going to represent you. Just don't elect them because they're going to tell you what you want to hear. See what they've done. If they haven't done what you sent them there to do, then give somebody else a chance. Please. That's all I ask. If you like today's show and it made you think a little bit, and you share it with family or friends, and they say, well, you know what? I don't want to get it secondhand from you anymore. I want to listen myself. Tell them, as a podcast, they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States and parts of Canada. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and of course, thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.